Bom dia. Não ouvi direito.
Bom dia.
Babies are fascinating. Small in size, they have such a big impact in their lives that those who are surrounding them, that their lives will never be the same again. When my daughter, Beatrice, was born back in 1993, I stayed away from the Department of Psychology for a month, where I was doing my PhD. Then I went there to collect some material for my thesis. And I met my supervisor, Kevin Conlon, who asked me how I was doing. And I said to him, I was still adapting. He gave a big laugh and told me, Edson, after you have children, your life will never be the same. It is adaptation every day till the end. Kevin also taught me that babies are very competent. Indeed, they are more competent than us, the adults, as they do so much with very poor conditions that we provide. Because we have this idea that babies are immature, they are reactive to the world, and they are a bunch of reflexes that feed, sleep, and cry. Since then, much has changed in the lab, in the universities, in the research and development. And now we have a rich pool of studies unraveling babies' wonders, what babies can do as active and social beings. During these 2 days, you will have a glimpse of what we know about babies. And we are very fortunate to start these 2 days with Professor Audrey van der Meer, who is one of the leading researchers who have unraveled these competences of babies. She is Dutch, mother of 5, studied in the Free University of Amsterdam, in the Faculty of Human Movement Sciences, where she also got her master's in experimental psychology. She then moved on to Scotland in the psychology department at the University of Edinburgh, where she got her PhD under the guidance of David Lee. She is professor of neuropsychology at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, Norway, where she runs the developmental neuroscience lab together with Ruth, which is with us here as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, Professor van der Meer.
Thank you so much, Edson and Priscilla, for inviting me. I've actually already given a talk here in this very same room in 2018, so this is my second time at the department and giving a talk. So today I'm going to talk about wonderful babies, because I'm still fascinated by the fact that if you hold a baby for the very first time, they can't even hold up their heads. And then within a year, they are crawling up and down the stairs, they're uttering their first words, and they have developed a whole personality of themselves. So how is that people, what are the underlying forces that drive forward development? And if we understand a little bit more about these underlying forces, then we can also maybe help babies and young children who are not following that normal path. So Anson already said it, we're in Norway, Trondheim, a very old city, over 1,000 years, where we have this lab where we're studying behavioral and brain development. So this is my youngest daughter, Leah, and she was only a baby when we got this system, EEG system, that allowed us to see what is happening inside the heads of babies who are developing themselves. So that was very, very exciting times. Leah is 19 now and has started to study physical education, outdoor life, specialization in outdoor life with snow holes and canoeing and skiing and what have you. So we have over the past almost 20 years been studying infant brain development, basically. And in 2014, this photograph with this heading, that 1-year-olds are underestimated, appeared in the national newspaper, and it went viral. So within 2 days, 40,000 people clicked on this link to read about what it is why babies are underestimated. And I think we, as a culture, in the West at least, we have a tendency to underestimate our babies because they don't have any language. And in addition, their movements have this clumsy quality to them. And in our culture, we believe that our babies are born with an immature brain that doesn't allow them to learn or to produce movements at will. And that is because of a very, very influential theory, the cortical maturation theory, that holds that our babies are born with an immature brain and that they therefore have to wait during the first few months of life for their cortex to mature, and then they can start learning about the world around them and they can start making movements at will. So according to this cortical maturation theory, the early movements of our newborn babies are simply reflexes. It's like when you go to the doctor and he or she comes with the little hammer to test your kneecap reflex. You know, even though you know that she's coming, you can't help but give the kicking response. It's a reflex, it's dealt with by the primitive centers of the brain, and that is how we believe our babies, when they're born, are able to move. Only in inflexible, reflexive kind of ways that are not controlled by will and they do not have a voluntary quality to their movements. And that is why, for instance, during the first few weeks, when a baby smiles, the doctors and the nurses will say, that's just wind gas, stomach gas. Because we think that the central nervous system of very young newborn babies is not capable of producing a real social smile. Yeah, and the baby has to be around for 6 weeks or so, and the cortex needs to mature to be able to allow the first smile to occur and the first voluntary movements to occur. But I don't think that our babies are born with an immature brain. I think they come equipped with the senses are fully working, and they have, although they have a certain haphazard quality to their initial arm movements, for instance. I don't think that's because they have an immature brain, but they are born with rather unfortunate bodily proportions, unfortunately. So, to accommodate the large human brain, as compared to monkey babies, they have a very small head. Our newborn has a head the size, a quarter of the total body size. Compared to adults, we have a head which is 1/8 of our total body size. So these babies are born with a huge head, the size of a watermelon, which makes it difficult to control the very first movements. And in addition, because unlike monkey babies again, we don't have fur to keep us warm, we have a lot of fat under the skin. So our babies are born with a chubby body, which, so this big head, a fat body, and no experience in lifting their relatively heavy arms and legs against gravity, which makes the first movements difficult to control and give the first movements this haphazard quality to them. But I don't think that's because they are born with an immature brain that is incapable of learning. I think they are born with a brain that is ready to go, and the senses are ready to learn about the environment, and they just need some practice to build muscles that are strong enough to lift these heavy arms and legs against gravity. Because they have been sitting in the amniotic fluid for 9 months, and there the effect of gravity is much less than on dry land. We also know from ultrasound studies and from neonatal studies that the fetus remembers sounds and sensory experiences from the time it was in the womb. So why would the fetus have a more mature brain than the neonate? It doesn't make sense. So I have this colleague in Belfast, Peter Hepburn, who tested newborn babies only a couple of days old, and their mothers, they were hooked on a soap opera, Neighbours from Australia with Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan. I don't know if you've heard about them. But that soap opera has a theme song. And these mothers, they watched Neighbours every day during the last 3 months of their pregnancy. And when Peter Hepburn then showed this song to the newborn babies, there were signs that they recognized the theme song from the time they were still in the womb. So they've been learning and remembering as a fetus. So why wouldn't they be able to do the same as a neonate? It doesn't make sense. So according to the cortical maturation theory, our babies are born as primitive creatures with an immature brain, and they have to spend the first few months of their life waiting for their brains to mature. It's a bit like a good cheese or a good wine. You can't use it to its full potential until it has matured for a few months. And that is a shame, because in Norway nowadays it is very popular to say you don't see it if you don't believe it. Because if you think that your newborn baby is incapable of learning and has a very immature brain, then you won't start treating your newborn baby the way it deserves to be treated. It needs to be stimulated because it can learn, and it will recognize you, your voice, your face, and that makes the initial week so much more fun if you as a new mother or father realize that your baby can do all these things and is not as immature as our culture in the West makes us believe. also this cortical maturation theory has had as a consequence that in textbooks and medical lectures, a lot of emphasis is placed on those reflexes that the neonate is born with. There are 12 reflexes. I mean, it's like the palmar grasp reflex, the asymmetric tonic neck posture. You have the swimming, babies are born with a swimming reflex, so if you put them underwater, they will start sparking their little arms and legs in a coordinated way. There's a crawling reflex, 12 in total. And researchers have forever been trying to make this link between this early set of reflexes and later voluntary controlled behavior. And that is a shame, because as if these reflexes are the building blocks for later controlled voluntary purposeful behavior. And I don't think they are, because I don't think those reflexes are so basic and fundamental and simple and primitive as they are. So we looked at the mother of all neonatal reflexes, namely the sucking reflex. Newborn babies are born with a sucking reflex so that they can take milk from a breast or a bottle. And we wanted to see, I mean, we asked ourselves, can the sucking reflex in itself explain the fact that babies can feed properly from day one? So is it all about the sucking reflex in itself, just sucking at the breast or bottle, or are we talking about precise coordination between sucking, breathing, and swallowing? Is that the task for the newborn baby? So what we did was we took our equipment to the neonatal ward, and then we had a pressure transducer added to the teat of a bottle. So every time the baby sucked from breast milk from a bottle, you got this signal in black. The baby was also wearing a breathing band around its chest. So every time it expanded the breast cage to breathe, you got this signal in red. And then we had a stethoscope directly linked to a computer that we placed on the baby's throat. So every time the baby swallowed, we recorded those swallowing sounds, and they are presented in blue there. And then by testing several babies between 2 and 3 days of age, we found that an optimal feeding pattern is characterized by a 1-to-1-to-1 coordination of sucking, breathing, and swallowing. But we also noticed that not all babies could suck, breathe, and swallow at the same time in a coordinated way. The fetus has, of course, been sucking and swallowing amniotic fluid for about 4 to 5 months. So sucking and swallowing is a task that they have been doing before. But the thing about being born is that the babies, for the first time, need to do their own breathing, because before the oxygen came through the umbilical cord. So now they have to breathe at the same time and link it, coordinate it with sucking and swallowing. So we saw that some of our newborn babies, they were able to suck in black and swallow in the blue triangles, but they stopped breathing. They held their breath while doing so. And of course, they did that for about 15 seconds at a time, stopping breathing and feeding simultaneously. But then they had to stop stop the feeding and catch their breath because they were turning a little bit blue in their face, and then start again. And it says itself that this way is not a very efficient way to feed, because the baby may spend a lot of energy feeding without anaerobic, so to speak, and then they use a lot of energy doing that, and then they may fall asleep. They may get tired before they're completely satisfied, and then you quickly end up in this negative spiral with feeding and sleeping problems, because the baby might wake up earlier because it wasn't completely satisfied. Several other analyses showed that swallowing ideally takes place just before the next suck and between breathing out and breathing in, and that maximum sucking pressure is preferably coordinated with breathing out. So here on the bottom I have blown up a feeding pattern lasting 20 seconds, and here you see what it says here, that maximum sucking pressure initially is coordinated with breathing out, as it should, which is the ideal pattern. And then something is happening. So the next few sucks, and then this suck, and this suck, maximum sucking pressure is suddenly coordinated with breathing in, which was not the optimal breathing pattern. So what does this newborn baby do? It could just pretend that nothing was wrong, and it could continue sucking on breathing in, and then maybe risk having milk coming out of its ears. Yeah? But no, this newborn baby introduces a 2-second pause in its sucking pattern. 2 seconds. And then when it starts sucking again, already by the third suck, maximum sucking pressure is again coordinated with breathing out, as it should be. And the baby continues that way. So, as far as I'm concerned, this is problem solving in a 2-day-old baby, and not characteristic of a baby who is born with an immature brain that can only produce reflexes. Another thing about feeding is that the milk, breast milk, changes consistency during a feed. So initially the milk is thin and watery, and it's there to quench the baby's thirst. But later it becomes really creamy and thick, and most babies have no problem adjusting their sucking, breathing, and swallowing pattern to this change in consistency that happens during one and the same feed. So again, the babies are adjusting to local circumstances, and reflexes, primitive reflexes, are not capable of doing that. So even the sucking reflex, I don't think, is a real reflex, and the babies show that they are much cleverer than we think they are. And then there's this other thing about the early arm movements of babies. In the literature, those are described as haphazard, purposeless, involuntary, and so on and so forth. But we know that babies have this genuine interest in their visual arms, and they will work really hard to keep their arms up in their field of view. And so they should, because for all they know, babies could have been born with wings, and then that would allow completely different action possibilities. But our babies are born with hands that initially are perceived as objects, but they have to learn that they are not like any old object or toy in the outside world, but that these hands actually belong to themselves, and that they can use them to touch all sorts of interesting objects in the environment. So they have to incorporate their own hands into their visual frame of reference in order to use them to their full potential. And that takes about 4 months of looking and learning about themselves. And then they will grab your keys at will. So it's not the case that the palmar grasp reflex gradually is suppressed and then opens up the way for the baby to start reaching out and catching things at will. But it's more that these babies, when you put them on their back, they will start moving their arms and they will think that's an interesting sight, and they will work to, gradually they will start learning about that these hands are always there, and they will learn to perceive objects in terms of their own hand size as too big to be grasped or appropriate to be grasped. And they will learn to perceive distance in terms of their own arm length as too far to be reached or within reach. So they have to do lots of lessons in practical optics in order to be able to know what they can do with the body they're born with. And this is my eldest daughter, born in 1990, and in Edinburgh. And I was doing my PhD at the time when she was born on arm movements. So I thought, why not film her to see what she does when we're not there in her own bed. And so I put a video camera over her cot. I had fed her and I had changed her and she was ready for bed again. So I put her down and she slept for about half an hour. And then she woke up and she started exploring her own hands. And as the developmental psychologists we are, we put toys in her cot on strings down her. And this, at 3 months, babies have not started successfully reaching and grasping yet. But they have a sincere interest in their own hands. And you will see that Zoe is studying her own hands, and then accidentally she touches one of the toys and she goes like, huh, was that me? And so this is pre-reaching, and only a month later most babies will be able to move their hand to a desired place to catch things. And she does this for about half an hour, exploring and learning about herself. And then she falls asleep again. So if I hadn't been filming her, I wouldn't have known that this behavior, I mean, in language development, they often record babies babbling to themselves while they're alone in their cot. But in motor behavior, we don't do that. Phase, and it also tells us that we maybe shouldn't be swaddling babies when they're very, very young, because then we deprive them of studying their own hands. So swaddling in a blanket, you know, to give them the idea that they're back in the tight space of the womb. And many cultures do that, especially in Russia, they still do that. But maybe from about 2 months or so, it's better to leave them the arms free so that they can explore their own arms. Oh, and we never know, but by stimulating Zoe's eye-hand coordination in this extreme manner, Zoe became a very good handball player, and she actually played Brazil in the 2012 Olympics in London and scored 3 goals. I think this is her first goal against Brazil. They lost the game overall, but still. So and in 2020 I was part of this Netflix series Babies, and I just show a very short clip which is all about the earliest arm movements, and then I say from the heart kind of that we shouldn't underestimate our young babies because they're much smarter than we give them credit for.
Young babies are so much more intelligent and aware of what is happening around them. Please don't underestimate these wonderful creatures.
Okay. So when we're interested in development, sooner or later, the nature-nurture debate pops up. Are we born this way, or have we become this way? How much of development is learned? And then, traditionally, and since the ancient Greeks, there are two main answers to this question. The one extreme answer comes from the nativists, who think that babies are born with a genetic developmental plan that just needs to be read sequentially, and that's when all babies around the same time start sitting up, start crawling, pull to stand, and start walking around their first birthday. And then the other camp are the extreme empiricists or the behaviorists, and they say that everything of development is learned. So if you ask an extreme empiricist, what does a baby see when it opens its eyes for the first time? The empiricist will say that the newborn baby opens his eyes to a complete world of chaos, with colors, motion, very difficult, and it needs to go through this long process of sorting the visual information, often aided by touch. Touch teaches the eye, the empiricists say, to make sense of the visual world around them. And that may take many, many years. You could also see that the nativistic theory is the more pessimistic developmental theory. Because if you are so unfortunate as a baby to be born with a bad set of genes, then there's nothing parents, teachers, psychologists, pedagogues, therapists can do to help you. You're stuck with the bad genes you were born with. Whereas empiricism has a more positive, more positive view on development, because there is a role to play for. The experiences that a baby or a young child is exposed to will help shape its development. And then there is always people who say, well, it's not nativism or empiricism, it's somewhere in the middle. It's called interactionism by Piaget, proposed by Piaget, that it's a little bit of inborn schemata and a little bit of the environment, where you, through the processes of accommodation and assimilation, help the baby will interpret the world in a better way. But, and so the interactionism for years has been proposed as the solution to the nature-nurture debate. But I'm personally not so happy with interactionism being the solution to the nature-nurture debate. Because we're talking theories now, right? And all theories have their advantages and their disadvantages. So nativism has its advantages and disadvantages, and so has empiricism. So if you then just collapse two extreme theories into one, you actually may end up with a developmental theory that has double the disadvantages of the two theories that you're collapsing. Yeah? So, maybe interactionism is not the solution to the nature-nurture debate. Also, if you look at this, this drawing, the developmental plan, whether inborn or learned, exists outside the developing organism. So it's steered from the outside. Yeah? And that is also problematic, because then you have a tendency to just focus on the outcome. You know, saying that, okay, during development, all babies develop into adults. Yeah, but that's not so informative, because we want to know how the underlying processes, how newborn babies develop into well-functioning adults. So by saying that the plan exists outside the organism, and that is something that both the nativists and interactionists and empiricists have in common, they all think of development as steered from the outside the developing organism. So over the past 30 years or so, a new view on development has arrived. And I'm just going to mention it because there's no time to really go much into it. But it's called the the dynamical systems theory to development. And there, instead of this controlling from the outside plan to steer development, development occurs through self-organization from all the parts, both the baby's parts, but also the systems, subsystems in the environment. So for instance, walking unaided. The baby needs to have enough muscle strength to maintain its body in an upright position. It also needs to be motivated to start walking. It needs to have two legs. I mean, with only one leg or one functioning leg, it will be difficult to start walking. But also in the environment, the floor needs to be free from objects. The floor can't be too steep. It can't be too slippery. And if all these subsystems are in place, then a baby, and if the baby can maintain balance on 2 feet, because that is also a very important factor in being able to walk on 2 feet, then the baby will walk. But it's not the case that one of the subsystems, like the brain, is more important than any of the other subsystems. But together, they work so that development can occur. And then you may say, well, you know, nativism, nobody believes that anymore. And extreme empiricists, they don't exist anymore. And I disagree, because in 2018, in Oslo, we had this geneticist visiting who was promoting his latest book. He has been working as a geneticist for 40 years, and he has been studying identical twins, many sets of identical twins, because the idea is, from a nativistic point of view, if you have two individuals with exactly the same genes, then doing something, training one twin and not the other, or depriving one twin and not the other, would not make any difference to their developmental outcome. Because it's all in the genes, and they will be read. So irrespective of the environmental experiences these twins have, they will end up at the same developmental level. And that's what he is still saying in 2018 in his latest book. And he went as far as to say that how children are raised is less important than parents think. Genes are the single most important thing parents give their children. Yeah, I know, but he's a very respected geneticist and has worked 40 years with these identical twins, like I said. And he claims that, you know, whatever we do as parents or therapists or physical educationalists or psychologists, it doesn't matter, because they will reach their developmental top based on their genes. And I would even like to go further and say that how we raise our children today, at least in Europe and the West, still is still influenced by the maturational theory we were talking about in the beginning. So, for example, in our culture, we are always warned not to intervene in a child's development, not push the child before it's ready. New skills should be allowed to appear by themselves and when the child is ready for them. Smells maturationalism from a long distance. Attempts to speed up this natural development are thought to have serious physiological and even psychological consequences. If you push them too much, for instance, if you push them on the potty too early, then they may develop anal character, according to Freud and psychoanalysis. Then they become, as an adult, they become very perfectionistic, very strict, very difficult to be around because they want everything their way. Yeah. And of course, nowadays we have this trend in America, Europe and Japan that children, young children, are fully potty trained much later than they were only 70 years ago. Because parents are a bit hesitant. They don't feel that they have to teach their babies to go on the potty, but that the child will say when it's ready to stop with nappies. And of course nappies nowadays, they are ultra-absorbent and thin and they look like the real underwear, so there's no real incentive for babies anymore to stop with nappies and go on the potty. My grandmother in Amsterdam, she had 11 babies between 1940 and 1960. So every other year she had a new baby coming along. And she had no washing machine in the early years and no tumble dryer. So she couldn't afford to have 2 children in nappies simultaneously. My father is the second oldest, and he remembers that Mondays was nappy boiling day, and then the whole house would stink of these dirty nappies that they would boil in hot water to get them clean. And so my grandmother actively taught all her babies to go on the potty and to quit with nappies by the time they were 1 year of age. And in many other cultures, it's very common to be without nappies from 7 months onwards, both day and night, both urine and feces. So it can be done because, after all, it's just training to use a very specific muscle that can be trained. Yeah. I always do make this mistake. Because the next slide, I'm going to show a baby who is just under 4 months, and she is doing something. She's performing a certain action. And if you are influenced by this cortical maturation theory, then whatever the child is doing will give you butterflies in your stomach. So be honest with me now, and if you feel butterflies in your stomach, then I claim that you are influenced by the maturation. Okay? Ready?
Yes, ready.
This baby is bearing her own weight with straight legs in the hand of her uncle, in this case. And in my culture, this is not done, because babies shouldn't be wearing their own weight too early, because it might damage their backs, it might damage their spine, and they may become bow-legged. Weird joke.
Yeah.
Yeah? So there's, again, doing things too early with babies, that is not good for them, and you can actually cause them to have problems later on in life. So that's why parents today are very hesitant in stimulating their babies. In Norway, I don't know about Brazil, but in Norway there's this big thing about not placing babies in a sitting position before they can move into that position themselves. Again, to prevent their backs from hurting later on in life. So physiotherapists are very concerned if you place your baby in a sitting position over longer periods of time, in a car seat, for instance, or in one of those other seats. And the Norwegian health authorities, they say that baby chairs are only to be used for short periods. Sitting for long periods at a time can put too much strain on the child's back. Do you have that here as well?
No.
No? Now this is very Norwegian, because in Sweden, the country next to Norway, they are not so concerned about this. But in Norway, this is still the official health recommendation not to put babies in a sitting position. There's a tribe in Uganda where they have where face-to-face interaction is very important between parents and children. So they teach their babies to sit up, and those babies are able to sit up by themselves from they are 3 months old. Whereas in our culture it's around 6 months. So, and there's no evidence that these babies in Uganda have bigger back problems than our babies have at all. And also if you look at absolutely all other cultures around the world, babies are being carried in all sorts of different positions. In a sitting position. And there is no evidence that babies growing up in these cultures where they are being carried around in a sitting position have a higher chance of developing back problems later on in life. In fact, being carried around in an upright position allows the baby to develop neck muscles that are strong enough to hold up that big head we talked about earlier, and to move their arms and legs, their heavy arms and legs, against gravity. So it's helping them to promote their motor development, I would say. And in many cultures, it is very common with promoting motor development from birth. In these cultures, they feel that parents need to teach their babies all the motor milestones, like sitting, standing, crawling, and walking, and they give baby gymnastics and baby massage from birth in order to make the baby who has been sitting inside the womb all curled up. So the baby's limbs need to be straightened, need to be massaged, need to be stretched, so that the baby can grow up tall and straight. And I have this, and here you see that this balancing with straight legs is practiced by the Bambaras from the time the baby is about 1 month. So I have this colleague in Paris. She is both a developmental psychologist and an anthropologist. And she has been traveling the world to see how different cultures stimulate their baby's motority. And this is a 4-week-old baby in Mali who is going through the daily bathing routine. And he is crying through the whole session, but that's not so important because it's for his own good. He has to go through this in order to be able to grow up straight and tall. If not, he risks ending up in a wheelchair, and that is the worst that could happen. This is the grandmother who usually do this with their babies. And 4 weeks, he's a real strong boy. So here is stretch, and it looks, with our eyes, it looks really rough what they're doing with these babies. She will lift him in one arm later, whereas we are told, oh, be careful for the baby's head, be careful, support the head all the time. Would you lift the baby 4 weeks old that way? Now she's cleaning his ears and nose. So a completely different attitude, that early stimulation is very, very important, and leaving the baby just like that for its brain to mature can be detrimental to the baby's development. But other cultures also show us evidence of the opposite, namely deprivation is common in many other countries. And again, the idea is that, for instance, in the Gavora cradling, they put their babies in a cradle, and the cradle has a hole in the bottom where the baby pees and poos. So, and they fix the baby around with 2 straps, like this, and the baby is spent up to the first 2 years in this Gavora, and they're not taken out of it for feeding and not for changing. So the mother just breastfeeds hanging over the cradle, and the hole in the mattress ensures that the poo and the pee are running away. And we have also evidence from China, which is a very, very poor area with very little water. So instead of buying expensive nappies for the babies, they put the baby in a sleeping bag filled with sand, and the baby has to poo and pee in the sand, and the sand is changed regularly. But attached to a sleeping bag filled with heavy sand, the baby can't sit, it can't roll, it can't crawl, it can't walk, and again these babies spend up to the first 2 years of life in a sleeping bag like that. And then when they come out, obviously they're severely delayed in their motor development, but they catch up. But Western researchers have also looked at their cognitive development by testing their IQ, and there's a lot of numbers here, but if you look at the colored logs, then you can see that the sandbag babies are overrepresented in the very low IQ scores, belonging to Down syndrome, for example, below 70 on the Ravens test. And so twice as many in that group, and on the other extreme, over twice as many are in the control group with the high IQs. And so far, the findings indicate that this poorer intelligence is not so easy to get rid of, unfortunately. Because somehow it is very important for babies to be able to crawl around and explore the environment on their own terms and under their own steam, so that they can experience firsthand what the world looks like from under the sofa, from behind the sofa, and so on and so forth. So these concepts like under and above, in front of, behind, are very difficult to learn if you're not capable of moving around yourself. Okay, so then quickly on to our brain research. I already mentioned that I'm very interested in normal development, to understand the driving forces that cause normal development to occur, but I'm also interested to use this knowledge to help babies who are at risk. And prematurity today is a big thing in the world. 1 in 10 people are born prematurely, that will say before week 37 of gestation. So there are as many left-handers on the face of the earth as there are premature individuals. So it's a big thing. And every year on November 17th, we celebrate these small miracles, and buildings across the world, so Sydney Opera House, and also buildings in Norway and rest of Europe are lit up in the color purple, which indicates hope. And the thing is, because of improved intensive care facilities, more and more very premature babies are surviving a premature birth. But the incidence of children with minor to moderate problems is also on the increase. So we have to work to pick out those, just take a few times. Yeah. We have to work to pick out those babies who are in need of extra intervention as early as possible when the brain is still in a plastic state. So we use EEG. So these are nets where very sensitive electrodes are sewn together in the form of almost like a swimming hat. And we put the net in a salt saline solution, and then every sensor is embedded in a sponge. So the sponges suck up or absorb the saline solution, and then we get really nice contact between the baby's scalp and the sensors. And of course, babies have a much thinner scalp than adults, and also they have very little hair usually. So we get really nice data, and we pick up electrical activity that is produced in the baby's brain anyway. So we're not sending like Röntgen or X-ray or fMRI. We're not sending anything in the baby's brain. We're just picking up data, electrical data. And just to show you an idea of one of our experiments, this is a ball moving towards the child. And then either approaching under different speeds on a collision course or veering off to the side. And it's important for the babies to watch as long as possible. but especially the looming one is a very popular experiment because it's a little bit scary, because if something real this size and at that speed approaches you right towards the face, then you could actually damage your eyes. So then we test babies longitudinally, cross-sectionally, we test preterm babies, and we see that over the first year of life, the full-term babies show a lot of development in their brain data, whereas the preterm babies show very little development. So we think that because these babies were born up to 3 months early, that it has done something to the visual processing part of their brain, the dorsal stream of their brain, which starts in the visual cortex and goes up to the top of the brain, and has disturbed that development. And we have also started looking at the same babies, but now they have turned 6 years of age. And then we see that the preterm babies have caught up considerably, but there are still small details that they are not doing as well as the full-term babies. And all this research together shows that crawling gives a brain boost. And that makes sense. Because if you're only capable of lying flat on your back, staring up at the ceiling, then you don't need advanced neural networks that inform you about distance, direction, speed, and so on and so forth. But as soon as you start becoming mobile, then it's much more important to process this kind of information quickly and very precisely. And it has the movements, they have to be self-produced. Old research, Heldenheim from the early 60s, has tested pairs of kittens where the 2 kittens were exposed to identical vertical stripes, vertical stimulation, and it was only the kitten that was allowed to move itself, as opposed to the kitten that was driven around the same visual information, that only the kitten that moved itself through the environment developed normal vision, the other kitten developed abnormal vision. So it doesn't help as a mother to start pushing your baby around in the pushchair and to give it optic flows, but you have to help the baby out of the supine position. And there are several ways of helping babies out of the supine position. You can carry them in an upright position, facing inwards initially, but around 4 months, the babies are very interested to be turned around. And then you can walk and they can perceive the environment. Baby swimming is very popular in Norway. It's not about the fancy diving and underwater stuff or balancing with straight legs, but it's more about a nice family activity to do, concentrating on face-to-face communication. And this is a 2-week-old baby, his first baby swimming class. And in the warm water, the baby is reminded of the amniotic fluid and is able to move its arms and legs much easier. And they will get tired, they will eat well, they will sleep well, and so it's a nice family activity. And the father obviously can also join, and siblings. And then by helping your baby out of this supine position by giving tummy time, it's very important for the baby to be able to build neck muscles that are strong enough that can hold their own head up. And also it's of course a natural position. And these are my granddaughters, Nikki and Cleo. And their mother, my daughter, has been training them on their tummies very often. And so at 3 months of age, they're very comfortable in this position, and they are literally having a chat with each other. So the accelerated motor development of lying on their tummy brings about cascades of development that go all the way to language development and communication, which is beautiful. This is one of the first times that they actually noticed each other, according to my daughter. So, and in July, there's this big infancy conference in Ottawa, in Canada, which actually is called, has the title Developmental Cascades. So here you see how everything kind of is dependent on the previous thing, and by stimulating and giving tummy time early on, and parents, according to physiotherapists, have become very wary of putting their babies on their tummies, because we were, since 20 years or so, we were advised to put our babies to sleep on their backs, because to prevent cot death. And but now physiotherapists notice that parents have become wary of putting their babies on their tummies under any circumstances, also when the baby is awake and when it's under supervision. But it's important to get the baby out of that kind of boring supine position, put it in a prone position, which is a natural proning position, and then all the other parts of development can start developing. Another experiment is about optic flow. So there we present dots, structured dots or random visual motion. So this is random, and this is simulating forward self-motion. This is simulating reverse self-motion. And again, babies are happy watching this for about 5 seconds, giving us loads of trials. It looks as if the baby is looking up, but actually we're filming him from below, so he's looking straight ahead. And he's dribbling a bit, and he's studying the screen. And then if we do this kind of research, we tend to get an N2 negativity peak in blue, in the parietal occipital area of the brain, back of the head, and up to the top of the head. In blue is for forwards optic flow, and in red is for random visual motion. So it takes both adults and babies longer to make sense of the random visual motion as opposed to the structured forwards optic flow in this case. So the adults have exactly the same plots, but everything is happening 60 milliseconds earlier. And recently we published a paper with one of my master students, where we had 3 groups of babies, and 3 was the external sensor. We had 3 groups of babies, babies who received extra motor stimulation in the form of baby swimming or baby massage, a full-term control group, and preterm infants. And they were tested, all babies were tested twice, once at 3 to 4 months before they had become mobile, before they started crawling, and once around the end of the first year, after some weeks of crawling experience. And here we see, so we have forwards optic flow, reverse optic flow, and random visual motion. In the first session, we see that all babies perform the same, more or less the same, except for the extra stimulated babies who show faster responses, shorter latencies for forwards and reverse as opposed to random visual motion. But the most important finding is that after the onset of self-produced locomotion, we see that the extra-stimulated babies are outperforming the full-term control babies, and the preterm babies are not differentiating between the three forms of visual motion that we presented them. But hopefully they will show this differentiation when they're 6 years of age and start school and things become more important. And the demands society places on these children when they start school become larger. It's very important to promote learning and prevent problems when babies are young, because there's so much happening in the early 2 years of life in the brain. The brain doubles in size and weight from birth to 1 year of age, and there are up to 1,000 new connections between nerve cells a second during the first 2 years of life. So, and we also have to be aware that those networks that are made, that we maintain them. Because networks that aren't used, they will disappear in favor of networks that are being used. So it's very important to maintain the networks that you have helped your baby to make. Many psychologists especially say that we have a brain to think or feel, but I disagree. I think we have a brain to control our actions and our behavior, and that movement is the brain's language. So from an early age we have to help babies to come out of this supine position and provide them with possibilities to explore the world. Playing, for instance, rat research has shown that rats who grow up in a kind of gymnasium where they have tunnels and hamster wheels and hiding places and where they can climb, they have much more dendritic branching in the brain than rats that grew up in a normal cage. And also evidence from the 1970s from the UK, where they have this class system, upper class and working class, shows that working class children were advanced in their motor development because they were allowed to jump on the furniture and climbing the curtains, whereas upper class children were just supposed to sit still and be pretty. So the first 1,000 days of life, from gestation to being born and up to 2 years of age, form the basis for the brain's infrastructure. So, and the brain stays plastic throughout life, but the biggest plasticity in the brain is when babies are up to 2 years of age. So we have to use that principle. So we have to give, we shouldn't underestimate young babies and toddlers. We should treat them with respect, and when we send them to kindergarten, we shouldn't just expect them to be looked after and fed and changed, but they also have the right to be given a pedagogical curriculum. It's actually not so difficult to teach a 2-year-old either to swim or to read, but of course we as adults have to provide either the water or the letters to the child, so that it can, otherwise we would never know. So it's the adults around young children that have to provide stimulation and experiences, and then the child can choose. I mean, and that's the next slide is all about. This is not a competition. It's not a competition to teach children to read and write as soon as possible. Childhood is not a race to see how quickly a child can read, write and count. Childhood is a small window of time to learn and develop at the pace which is right for each individual child. And it's up to the adults around the children, also in kindergarten, to help the babies and children reach their full potential. So instead of underestimating infants and young children, we should treat them as competent individuals with a large developmental potential. We should be aware that this cortical maturation theory is still in the back of our mind, unwillingly, without most people realizing it, but it is there. And even very small babies must be given the possibility to develop physically, perceptually, cognitively and socially by giving them access to varied experiences. And that's up to the adults to provide these varied experiences. And there's no need to wait and see. Potential problems will likely show up in fast development during the child's first 2 years. It's important to properly address these problems and offer specific challenges and not just assume that the child will grow out of it. And when it comes to varied experiences, as a developmental psychologist, I'm very worried when I see these kind of pictures. Children passively interacting with screens. The under threes have nothing behind a screen to do. It's not because there aren't apps available for very young children that teach them about numbers and letters and colors and so on. The very good things exist, but babies can't afford to spend time behind the screen experiencing an impoverished environment rather than go out there and find out about the world they live in by themselves, first-hand experiences. And having said that, then as parents, knowing that babies from the very first start are interested in communicating with us, are sending out signals to communicate, then if we miss those signals because we are busy on our phones, then that's not a good thing. So thank you very much, and thank you to all of the babies that have helped us and their parents who have come to the lab often several times to and allowed us to test their babies. Thank you very much. Is there time for questions, or shall we wait for the...
Well, thank you very much, Audrey. I think we have time for questions, at least 15 minutes. Our next activity will be 11. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we have time. We can have questions, comments, doubts, points.
No doubts.
I have a question. Recently, I've been seeing people using hand language with kids to communicate them better. Do you think can we consider this approved that babies can communicate themselves so much well, even then can talk as well for a while?
Yes. I usually mention that another language is probably the best brain stimulation there is. And sign language, baby sign language, counts as another language. So it's, and I have many mothers in the lab who have exposed their babies to simple sign language. And these babies, they can say that they're thirsty when they're like 6 months. and it's so amazing, and the mothers love it, and they are almost surprised themselves that their young babies can do this. So I would recommend it, yes, definitely. And if you have the possibility of teaching your child 2 languages or more, go for it. And like I said, sign language is counted as an extra language.
All right, thanks.
Oh, this is a good point, because I thought that this kind of trying to teach signals, to talk by signals with children would delay their capacity to speak, or would it disturb this process of speaking?
Well, they say that babies growing up in multilingual environments, they may be a little bit late in starting to speak. But when they do start speaking, they speak both or all 3 languages equally well. So I don't see, I mean, in the 1970s, there was this theory that a child could only learn to speak 1 language as its mother's tongue. And therefore, parents who emigrated, they were advised to not speak their native language to the child, but the language that the child was growing up in order to prevent having 2 bad first languages. But nowadays we know that children are so much more capable, and they can easily learn to speak up to 5 languages without problems. You know, so if they have two parents who speak their language each, if they then have a nanny who speaks another language, and they go to an English school, for instance, no problem whatsoever. But there may be a short delay, but that will be caught up again.
Nós temos 2 questões, eu só queria lembrar o seguinte, o Luiz me lembrou aqui, vocês podem fazer em português, tá? E a gente tenta traduzir. Tem 3 pessoas agora, ela, ele aqui e ela lá, mais um. Então vamos lá.
So the grasping reflex, it's a little bit confusing to me. Do you not agree that it's a reflex? So what's confusing is that if you place something in a baby's hand, your finger, anything for that matter, they'll clutch fiercely. But it's your understanding that they're exploring their movements rather than just responding to a reflex, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that our babies are born with this set of 12 neonatal reflexes. But they're not the building blocks for later voluntary behavior. That's basically all what I'm saying.
Okay.
But the reflexes are very big in the cortical maturation theory, because they say that the babies are born with an immature brain, only capable of producing reflexive behavior, and then the primitive centers of the cortex starts to mature, and it suppresses those primitive parts of the brain and the reflexes, and then the baby starts, in a kind of a discrete kind of manner, the baby starts interacting with the environment at will. So the reflexes are used in the cortical maturation theory as evidence that that's how it's working. That our babies are born with this immature brain, and that the cortex matures after birth, the first 4 or 5 months after birth, and then is capable of, then the baby can start life properly and can start interacting with the world. So I think those early arm movements are spontaneous, and they are not based on reflexes at all.
Okay, I was just asking because I've never seen a baby let go voluntarily, so I was wondering, is that really, I mean, I don't know if you play something that will cause a slight discomfort in their hand, like a key has rough edges, so I imagine if you grip on it, forcefully, for a baby, it might be a little uncomfortable, but I don't see them letting go. I have to pull it off of them.
I mean, that palmar grasp reflex is very strong, and you can literally lift the baby off the table.
Right.
So strong, they're clutching on. But maybe that has to do with our evolutionary past, when we were still living in trees, and that babies had to cling on to their mothers. we never know. And also the stepping reflex, which is another reflex, that has often, theorists have been discussing and arguing about, what is the link between the stepping reflex in the neonatal period and later voluntary independent walking on two legs. And they've been proposing links between the two. But it now looks like that reflex has its function antenatally in the womb, because the fetus has to change position very often. Because in this watery, warm environment of the womb, if they were to lay still all the time, they would stick to the uterine wall. And also, in order to improve circulation, blood circulation, they have to make these massive movements. And they may actually use the stepping reflex to make a somersault and change position that way.
My daughter did the somersault with the stepping reflex on the wall. The first time that she looked at it, she didn't know that much. There's one there.
Is it okay exposing these babies to at a very young age to this bright screen doesn't cause any psychological damage, or if they're photosensitive? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point, because many people are worried that some parents might overstimulate their babies. But actually, babies are very interested, young babies are very interested in communicating. And if they don't want to anymore, then they will start to fuss, or they will look away. So they're also very capable of quitting communicating. So, we should trust them. And of course, if they are looking away or start crying, then don't be invasive and say, come on baby, we need to communicate, because invasive mothers, their babies start speaking later, actually. But most mothers and fathers intuitively do this right. They talk to their baby, and when the baby shows signs of being tired or being bored, then they stop. So, yeah, it's only a handful of parents who don't have this intuitive parenting style.
So when you say about the swallowing, then it's better to not do it because for the development of the baby. For me, it's a little bit contradictory, because there is an American pediatrician that say the 3 first months of the baby is like outside of the womb development, like just to this period outside of the womb. And for me, it's like if I do it, the baby is not developing. If I don't, my mind is a little bit contradictory when you say you don't do it, but when he say you do it because you make the baby a little bit more comfortable to adapt to the world.
Yeah, I mean, saying that our babies are born immature and that the first 3 months of life are merely an adaptation to after being born, that is of course a sign of a maturational theory. And I don't agree. I don't agree that babies are born with this immature brain, but I think they are born with a brain that is ready to go from day one. And eye-hand coordination, we know, starts to develop very early. So by swaddling the child in the early months, you take away the chances from the baby to be able to get to know its own body and start reaching out and catching toys. So there you see again this clash in, but I know that that's a very popular way of thinking, that our babies are almost born, all babies are born prematurely, and that the first 3 months are just, should just be used to help the baby adapting to life outside the womb. but I can't say I agree.
This question is asking if the same way that babies will learn, muscle memory, how they adapt to their movements and their vision, if olfaction is the same, if they will learn and remember smells of food they don't like, or the smell of their mom or something, if they have this, if they develop this memory the same way they develop for vision and movements.
Yeah, definitely. Swedish researchers have tested babies, newborn babies, and they presented them with breast pads that the mothers use to catch the leaking milk. So 15 breast pads placed around the baby, and then the baby can find the the breast pad that was used by the mother within 2 days after being born. So olfaction is a very old sense, and we humans, although we don't have as good noses as dogs or other animals, we use it a lot, and you can see that in places where many women live together. Then they start menstruating at the same time, and that is also done by olfaction probably. And there's also been done an experiment with college students where female students from a pile of used t-shirts had to pick out the t-shirt that was used by their boyfriend. And the students were saying, I can't do this. Yeah, but just try, it doesn't matter. And they were able to pick significantly more often the boyfriend's t-shirt amongst the whole pile of used t-shirts. So olfaction is important for humans as well. And in the neonatal period, it's of course for the baby to learn to recognize its mother.
Bem, só para não me perder, tem você aqui, tem um lá no fundo, acho que mais uma pessoa levantou a mão. Bom, vamos lá. Isso você.
Can prematurity affect the baby's locomotor exploration in the variables like number of steps, tiny movement, or falls? Premature babies.
Se a prematuridade pode afetar o desenvolvimento do
Bebê prematuro?
Se a prematuridade pode afetar a locomoção. Os números de passos do bebê.
Oh yeah, I see. That's a good thing. We tested the premature babies, corrected for their prematurity. So if they were born 3 months early, then we would add 3 months to their age when they were born too early. So, but we actually didn't find any differences in the premature babies in locomotor development. They were on time. Yeah. But on the other hand, the extra stimulated babies, they started crawling on average 5 weeks earlier than the control babies.
Previously, you told about a child that learned to speak sign language at around 6 months old.
Yeah, but maybe that was a little bit early, 8 months.
How old was the child when the parents start teaching them sign language?
Yeah, in Norway they say, or this baby sign, you can Google it, it's called baby sign. They encourage you to start between 6 and 8 months or so. And I mean, not like drilling, obviously, but every time you say, okay, let's drink some milk, you make the sign for milk. I don't know what it is, but and they will pick it up because they're just like little sponges. And then because actually speaking language is a very, very complex skill where you have to work several facial muscles and the tongue and the lips which are all muscles as well. And it's very difficult to produce spoken language for a young child. But they understand much more. And if they then can communicate through simple signs with their hands, that is easier to control, then it's a win-win situation.
Quem mais levantou a mão? Presidente.
It wasn't me, but I can talk. Thank you very much for your talk. It was a really pleasure to be here and to learn more about your wonderful researches and what you think. And so thank you very much for sharing with us. I was just thinking about when you showed the father and the cell phone and the kid, and you told us about the kid. Well, they give signs and we have to regulate. And this is how development must be. And so I was thinking about the connection and about the diversity, because I was thinking about the deprivation and the stimulation and the cultural differences and beliefs and so on. So I was thinking that perhaps there's no, because I was just thinking about the questions here. Must we do that? Must we not do that? What should we do? What should we not do? And there are so different cultures and different environments. And development is situated in environments. So I was thinking, is there really a right answer? Or because you have kids who maybe in Norwegian they will get back problems with basic because they, well, I don't know, it's clothes like this or that. I don't know, just I don't know where did this belief come from, you know? Yeah. And so I would like to listen to your comments about it.
Thank you for asking that, because sometimes I experience that I make people more uncertain. But then I also say that whatever you do, according to your culture or your parenting style or whatever, most children will develop fine anyway. You know, we can tell by all these different cultures where they do very different things, but the children in that culture, they grow up as normal adults anyway. But the only thing I'm worried about is that parents refrain from doing things because they think their babies can't handle it. That's the only thing that I feel strongly about. Because they think the baby's brain is immature and you could damage the baby's back, or you could hurt the baby, or you could spoil the baby. That's the only thing. So whatever feels good, go for it. Trust your own parenting feeling and your own preferences. But in the years working in the lab in Norway, we have seen many babies and young mothers. And what I see is that parents nowadays, they become more and more insecure. And I think that's such a shame, because they read something on the internet. They want to do a good job, that first and foremost. They want their child to develop and grow up under the best possible circumstances. And then they go on the internet and they get one advice. Then they speak to their mother-in-law and they get another advice. Then they speak to their friends, another advice. And they become so insecure, they start not trusting themselves anymore, and they feel lost. And that is kind of spoiling the whole early period where you should be very close to your child. And in Norway we're very lucky, because we have like 1 year paid maternity leave. Wow. So then you can actually dedicate, it's only 1 year after all per child, but you can dedicate that year to getting to know your child and finding out what works for you, and you don't have to worry about putting bread on the table and going back to work very early. You can breastfeed as long as you like, which is also very good for the brain, baby's brain, the omega-3 in breast milk. So, yeah, but hopefully parents will realize that whatever they do, if they have the good intentions, and most babies will turn out fine. Yeah, but don't stop doing things because you think your baby isn't up to it, because they are very they are not that fragile. They are very versatile and they're very strong.
Connect with the baby, isn't it? Not with the internet. You must
Sorry?
connect with the baby, not with the internet.
Yeah. Yes.
Alguém mais? Alberto, Júlia, Pedro, Bruna, meus alunos aí, nenhuma pergunta? Vitória?
About the considerations, about the sitting position and about the back, the knee of the baby. When we can do a meet between, for example, biomechanics and physiology, and what the baby can do and what they want to do. For example, they're able to support their weight on that position on their ankles, hand, for example, but about their knee, talking about a biomechanical vision, how we can consider this both different vision, where can we go, or can we consider too if the baby is doing that because it's okay, they're able to choose what they're able to do.
Yeah, I think if your baby shows signs that it wants to stand in your lap, you don't have to force it to sit, because it's too young to do that kind of thing. Is that what you're asking? Because many babies from 3 months or so, they like standing on your legs when you hold them instead of sitting in your lap. And then in many cultures, people come and say, be careful, you ruin the baby's spine and the legs will go hollow, and so don't do things before the baby is ready for it. But if your baby is showing signs early that it is ready, because it can hold up its head and it can bear its own weight, then there's no problem.
All right, so if the baby chooses to do that because he's able to do it.
Yeah. And then I wouldn't force it to go back to an earlier phase in development.
All right.
Ok?
Here's a question. Have you ever studied the brain intellectual activity from kids that have some kind of disorder, like autism or Down syndrome? And if yes, is it different from normal children?
No. We live in a small city in Norway, in the middle of Norway, and we don't have enough babies with autism that we could include in our studies. And Down syndrome, we've never been there. So the only at-risk babies we have tested are preterm babies.
Actually, I have a curiosity. When you went to give lectures, do you think that people like this audience today is used with dynamic systems theory? Because here I am very surprised that people are very much rational here in the audience. So is it common to, when you will give your lectures, receive this kind of feedback, or people are more used with dynamic systems theory?
No, I would say that the type of questions that I got today are fairly typical. Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, when I teach my students, then I go deeper into the dynamical systems, of course, and direct perception and those kind of things. But I mean, I had enough material as it was.
No, because I think yet today people are very much focused, like in American booklets, people are always thinking about developmental changes and milestones, and I'm very surprised because development, like Ada said, involves a lot of systems, coordination, regulation, and so for me, yeah.
I mean, the ancient Greeks were already baffled by development. I mean, it's one of the most important questions that we want answers to, because I mean, development it's so nice because we've all been babies, and most of us will have children of our own, and understanding that process is just it's almost part of being human, I think.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we can have a break. So let's have a break and give a big applause to Audrey.